Hi, folks. This is J. Patrick Lemarr. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 4 of The Witches of Greyfolk. If you joined us last time for Chapter 3, you know that Chapter 3 was kind of a short chapter, and I got to thinking about that. Because it was a shorter chapter, I wanted to pay more attention to what's upcoming. So, Chapter 4 is actually a fairly short chapter as well, before we get into a meatier chapter in Chapter 5. So, today, instead of just doing one chapter, we're going to do Chapter 4 and 5. So that you get your time's worth of story here. We will recap briefly what's gone on in chapters 1 through 3. So chapters 1 through 3, we met Zale, the young wizard who is apparently untrained. Wizards are kind of rare in their world, it seems. He finds himself imprisoned alongside a pirate captain. That pirate captain's name, as far as we know, is just the captain. And he has been captured with this boy for some unknown reason. They have been captured by 3 witch sisters, and the witch sisters have them bound in a way in which Azael cannot use his magic to escape. He and the captain form a quick bond, which enables them to outsmart the sisters to the extent that Azael is able to get free long enough to escape. But after he helps them escape, he puts them outside of Greyfolk, which is where the witches were known to sort of haunt the woods and that kind of thing. The captain actually goes into a little bit of their history in that first chapter, so you may want to go back and listen to that if you haven't already. Certainly, spoilers for anything that you haven't already listened to. All of these chapters are available to go back and listen to. And of course, once the book is finished, I'll put it all together in one big long video as well. But once they escaped, they meet another character named Dark. Now, Dark is very different than Azael and the captain. He says that he comes from a world outside of theirs in which every story that's ever existed, including Azael's story and the captain's story, and possibly his own story, is written out. He calls it the Great Library. And in the Great Library, every story that's ever been written exists. He tells Azael that he's headed for trouble and that he's come to help Azael become a better person, to nudge him a little in the right direction because Azael goes wrong. Azael doesn't buy any of that. Azael's very young and headstrong. He kind of waves his hand at that and decides to go off on his own. The captain and Dark plead with him to stay, knowing that the town folks in Greyfolk will probably pay for the escape of Azael and the captain. Azael says he doesn't owe them anything. He's ready to take his own direction, his own path, which he does, and the captain goes with Dark to Greyfolk. There we see Dark meet a swordsmith who, knowing the witch sisters, the threat that they present to the people of Greyfolk is and someone who has himself lost someone to those witches, has made a sword that he calls the Witch Slayer, and Dark comes for that sword, asks him for it, and tells him that he'll face the 3 sisters, and then he asks for a saber for his new friend, the captain. So that is where we left off with the Witches of Greyfolk. Now, this story is available for free for download. The link is in the description as well as on your screen right now. You can download that for free. My gift to you, just something to pass the time while we're all stuck in this self-quarantine situation. As far as these audio bits, as I said, chapters 1 through 3 are already up and available for you to listen to. So if you haven't listened to anything yet, you can go back and check those out before we dive into chapter 4. If you like what you hear and you want to read anything else that I've written, those links to my store and all that will be down below as well, including if you want a paperback version of this particular story. It's found in Tales of the Evermore Volume 1. That will be in my store as well. That's really it. We're going to jump into chapter 4 and pick up where we left off, and then we'll move directly into chapter 5. Chapter 4, A Damning Sigil. Azael cursed no one in particular as he pushed his way through the unruly vegetation of the forest. The cold of the dungeon floor still seemed to nest in his marrow, and he wondered for the first time if it could be the result of a spell and not merely the ancient stone of that prison. His thoughts then turned to the captain and the strange wound the eldest sister Marava had carved into his chest. It was a sigil that had at first seemed wholly unfamiliar. Yet his thoughts grew less muddled the more distance he put between himself and the witches, and the bloody symbol began to seem more and more familiar, as if he had come across it in the elven histories he had once stolen from the libraries of Darmus. I never even offered a spell to speed his healing, Azale thought. I could have at least sent him to his death hole. The boy stopped and rested against a gnarled tree whose branches were unseasonably bare. He let his mind wander back over the elven tomes he had long since bartered away, using a simple spell, one of the first he had uncovered, to enhance his memory. Though his physical eyes were closed, his mind's eye was poring back over the histories, searching feverishly for any mention of the witches or any other strange occurrences in Greyfolk. When that proved fruitless, he turned his memory toward entries dealing with cannibalism and its connection to the dark magics. It was there, deep within those memories, that he rediscovered the sigil and its meaning. "Captain!" he shouted, but he knew his companion was far beyond his voice's capabilities. Chapter 5. The Defense of Greyfolk. Dark had positioned himself atop the watchtower in the northeast corner of Greyfolk's walls. He would have a clear line of sight over most of the town. The city's guards, of course, had been notified, but they were no match for what was coming for them. At Dark's request, the mayor of Greyfolk had asked most of them to maintain their posts, assigning only a few volunteers to assist Edwin Creel and the two heralds of doom. Though the swordsmith had reluctantly vouched for the two strangers, the mayor had given up hope that Greyfolk would ever be rid of the witch sisters. If they truly were coming to spill blood, the mayor would keep his own people out of the streets, and let the strangers, and Creel, if he was fool enough to join them, be the sacrifice that might appease them. At Dark's suggestion, the captain was positioned in the town square, hidden behind barrels of dry goods that lined the marketplace. Being equidistant from each of Greyfolk's three gates and the port at its easternmost edge, the captain would be able to quickly greet the witches no matter how they entered the unsuspecting town. Once he heard the signal from Dark, the captain would give whatever he had left to give in the service of Greyfolk and its people. To that end, the saber Creel had given him was far better than the rapier he had lost to those dread sisters, and felt surprisingly warm in the cool night air, like the blade itself was anxious for the fight. Still, the pirate felt entirely unprepared. From his position behind the barrels, he had no line of sight to the man called Dark, but he could see the square easily enough, as well as the shops which lined it on four sides. Creel, the swordsmith, along with the guardsmen that volunteered to stand with him, hid within those storefronts, armed and ready to flood the square, once Dark or the captain had lured the sisters there. With trade shut down and most of the town asleep, it had been decided the square was the safest place to wage a battle, even one that might prove as short-lived as fighting demonic witches without the aid of the host or the elves. The night was preternaturally still and cold. No barn owl questioned the moon. No vermin squeaked and schemed as they sought sustenance from the grain stacked high in front of the mercantile. Even the crickets had ceased chirping. In fact, the only sound the captain could hear, above the thump-thump-thump of his own heart, was a bashful breeze that seemed to die as it pushed past his braided beard to tickle his chin ever so slightly. He thought of his crew and his ship. He missed the swaying of the deck beneath him, and the scent of salt that permeated the air whenever the sea drake sliced through the foam. He missed the life he might never have again, thanks to the wizard boy turned coward. Dark had told him that the witches wouldn't be long, but more than an hour had passed since he had picked his hiding spot. The captain's legs and back were beginning to ache. Those devils should have come by now, he thought. Something's gone afoul. He risked a glance over the barrels. The square was quiet. He let his eyes trail its outer edges, examining one by one each shop and storefront. He had decided on his position before Creel and the guardsmen had chosen theirs. Their location was unknown to him. A bird whistle pierced the stillness, an all clear from Dark. But something tugged at the captain's subconscious. He sensed he was missing something obvious. Danger was near. Every instinct he possessed screamed that it was true, so he scanned the storefronts again. There! Across the square, a cobbler's shop seemed no different than any of the other darkened businesses, except On the frame of the door, something out of place. A splash of paint? Blood? Some shadow not cast by the moonlight? He couldn't be sure. The distance was too great. His eyesight too dimmed by age. He whistled, a warning that something was amiss. A call came back. Dark would wait. Should the captain whistle again, Dark would undoubtedly come running. Leaving his perch behind the barrels, the captain crouched and crawled from cart to cart, barrel to barrel, and post to post, trying his best to avoid being exposed. His size, however, in conjunction with a trick knee he had earned in battle many years earlier, left him as stealthy as an ox draped in wind chimes. The closer he got to the cobbler's shop, the more sour the captain's stomach turned. Every sound that fell to his ears held the potential of menace. Each stirring of the leaves prompted him to tighten his grip on his saber. He was not by nature a fearful man, but the fresh cuts on his chest were a reminder that magic folk could be unpredictable. Strange, he thought, running his fingers over the cuts. I almost forgot about my wounds until now. They seem to have nearly healed. Within 2 meters of the cobbler shop, the captain felt the wind shift. It brought the scent of blood to his nostrils. Fresh blood. Low to the ground, he crossed those last 2 meters and ducked out of view behind a stack of lumber in case someone, or 3 angry, witchy someones, were watching from the shop window. Along the doorframe, dripping slowly toward the plywood porch, was dark blood. Though he was determined to confirm it with his own eyes, he felt for certain that Creel and the guardsmen were dead. Before confirmation, however, must come a warning. Pursing his lips and bringing to mind the calls that Dark had taught him on their walk to Greyfolk, he inhaled deeply, trying not to choke on the smell of death. His warning would need to be loud enough for Dark to hear across the distance, and once it was given, the witches would most certainly be upon him. Though his new steel felt fierce in his hand, the captain was certain that facing the sisters would mean his death. He was not fool enough to doubt it, but was determined to fight nonetheless. He would make it a death to remember, to sing songs about in the isles and the port cities of men. He exhaled in a whistle, but found he uttered no sound. He tried once more, and again no sound escaped his lips. The cuts on his chest began to burn as though the knife was still slicing all too easily through his flesh, and though the wound itself had since healed a great deal, the sigil Mareva had carved there glowed brilliantly of bright copper and rich wine. Before he could try the whistle again, pain overcame him, and pressure in his chest tugged at him. He struggled against it, but the pain was beyond any he had ever known. Like a fish caught on a hook, he could fight for his freedom, but he would wind up the catch of the day all the same. If his ability to speak had not abandoned him to bend to the dark magics of the sisters, he'd have cursed at them, threatened and insulted them until they put him down like a rabid dog. So far as the captain could imagine, the witches of Greyfolk had no intention of making his death a quick one. They would take their time and relish his pain as surely as they would savor whatever soup they eventually made of his bones. Man of iron, man of mud, bound by magic, bound by blood. As before, when they held him and the boy in their prison or tomb or whatever the hells it was, their voices seemed to come from everywhere at once. The 3 sisters appeared in the center of the square, mouths motionless, moving toward him. Their feet did not touch the ground. Dead in autumn, raised in snow, slave to she the witches know. The wound on his chest had become unbearable. Everything within the captain wanted to scream out in agony, curse the saints, and die, but there was nothing he could do. Nothing he believed anyone could do. The chanting of the sisters meant less than nothing to him. Neither had their words for the boy. He would die as ignorant of their ways as he had lived, it seemed. He would die without ever seeing his ship and her crew, and without ever seeing her again, his beloved first mate. Light came from everywhere all at once, like the sun had hurried around the world and come to rest there above the square in Greyfolk. The witches shrieked and covered their eyes, but stood their ground. "Witches of Greyfolk, thick in the head!" It was the boy, Azael, his voice surrounding them, coming from every direction, though he was nowhere to be seen. "Captured a wizard, wanted him dead." As the light faded, darkness encroached so quickly the captain was functionally blind. He wondered if the same could be said of the sisters. "Witches of Greyfolk, struck blind and dumb." As his eyes adjusted, he could once more make out the shape of the sisters. They had halted their approach, confused perhaps by the boy's hijacking of their own tricks, but there was something else there behind them, something moving but lacking definition to his recovering eyes. Seeking their ruin. It was the boy. "Azael has come!" Caught unaware, the sisters were still actively working their magics on the captain when the boy struck. The ground beneath the witches opened like the maw of a great beast of legend and stretched upward to clamp down on their legs. The more they struggled, the more the very world sought to pull them under. As one, they began chanting in the dark languages that Azael had only read about, a spell they hoped would release them. The boy ignored the sisters and ran past them to the captain, motioning for a spell of protection for them both. "Keep your keel even and steady, Captain," the boy said. "The spell the sisters have cast upon you is blood deep and not easily removed, though I do believe it is possible. As in our captivity, I reckon you'll not be much use in this fight. Can you move?" The captain tried to shake his head. Even it would not obey. "Well then," the boy said with a grin. "When storytellers spin this tale around the campfires, perhaps they'll call it The Mighty Wizard Azael and the Pirate Statue. Or perhaps Azael the Hero and his partner, the Amazing Figurehead. Either way, dear Captain, we'll give them a story for the ages, eh?" Had the captain been able to speak, he would have warned the boy that the sisters had freed themselves of his spell. Under the grip of their enchantment, however, he could only watch as the boy erupted into flames like so much kindling. His simple spell of protection proved no match for the might of the witches. Azael's scream was inhuman. Though the boy rolled away from him, the captain could feel the intense heat of the fire. In his mind, he pleaded with the witches to stop, but if they could hear his thoughts, the sisters dismissed them as easily as they had dismissed the boy's spell. "Last is first," the sisters chanted. "First is last. Bound in futures, bound in past. One in many, many in one. Could we just not?" The man known to boy and pirate, simply as Dark, seemed to leap from nowhere. Had the moonlight not reflected off the sword he had been given by Creel, the captain never would have seen him coming. The witch's spell, in this instance, proved a boon, since the captain was unable to react in any way that might have warned of the attack. Unfortunately, the sisters were protected. Dark's blade glanced off of Marava's neck without breaking the skin. "A spell," Dark said dryly, rolling to a stop less than a meter away. "How sudden and seemingly unexpected." "You are an anomaly." "That's me all over," Dark said. "Your time has not come." "Oh, it came," Dark said. "Went, came again, circled back around. It all gets a tad confusing from this end." "The boy must be consumed." "Too late for that now, girls. I've come from the great library deep within the Evermore, and I'm here to write your ending upon the pages of time." "Do you plan on threatening them to death?" the boy asked, stepping up beside him. His skin was charred and cracked, but healing rapidly, the effect of a well-mastered spell. "I'd rather free them from their heads," Stark said, "but they seem to be protected." "Then I have my job and you have yours," Azael said. "Let's end this before more poetry is uttered, yeah? The captain is ensorcelled. You can't trust him until he's free." "He's a statue. I can trust a statue to be a statue." "Not this one," Dark argued. "Don't let them use..." The man called Dark was cut off by a blow of invisible force that sent him off his feet and high into the air. Azael watched the stranger as he crossed the square, bounced off a rooftop, and crashed through a charred clay chimney before falling out of sight into a street beyond the marketplaces. "Well, hells," the boy said, smiling awkwardly at the sisters. "I don't suppose you'd spare a fellow a brief moment to retrieve his sword, now, would you?" The sisters answered his spell even while Azael motioned for one to counter it. His magics may have been equal to theirs in sheer might. But he did not yet know that to be true, and was in those days untrained and not yet under the tutelage of the host. Though determined and fierce, the boy believed the fight would not last long if he was forced to continue confronting the sisters head to head. "I can protect myself from your spells until long after the sun rises, ladies," he bluffed. "I can give and receive punishment in turn. Eventually, one of us will make a mistake. Perhaps instead you can tell me what you need from the good captain. I'm not known for my loyalty, really. Ask anyone. We may find a bargain yet to be struck." "You will be consumed." But that's the rub, dears. I've assumed that given your unique culinary preferences, you meant to eat me. But that isn't it at all, is it? You mean to consume my power, to devour the very soul of me. Why? You will be consumed. Why, Merriva? What will you gain, eh? What have you foreseen that requires this action? Did you bother to explain it to Taylana or the other one? Or is that information something your lessers need not know? You will be consumed. I'm matching you spell for spell, you prattling cow. It's a standoff. Now tell me what this is all about. Why me? Why the captain? You must end before you are broken. You said that already. Sing me another. We must prepare her way. There now, that is new. Prepare the way for whom? Who exactly is coming? Shall I put a kettle on? You will be consumed. The boy sighed and motioned for yet another counterspell. It was only a matter of time before the sisters cast a spell beyond his experience to deflect, and Azael didn't understand their magics well enough to penetrate whatever spell of protection had previously spared them from Dark's blade. Tell me about the captain, then. Why him? Men of iron, men of mud. No more of that. For pity's sake, spare me your vagaries. Tell me what you mean to do. So focused was the boy on the threat before him, and the spells that he could see taking shape in the fabric of things, he had ignored Dark's warning and turned his back to the captain. Azael realized his mistake when the steel of the captain's saber pierced his back and came neatly through his abdomen. Blood issued slowly, following the curve of the blade until gravity pulled it in drops to stain the grass below. Save for Merriva, who allowed herself only the slightest smile, the sisters showed no sign of emotion. His head swimming with pain, the wizard boy fell to his knees, unable to focus on a spell that might save him. To Azael's surprise, the witches stepped around him to approach the captain, their whispers causing the sigil on the pirate's chest to glow and spark like hot steel battered between hammer and anvil. Thin threads of silvery light seemed to flow from the captain's scarred flesh, spinning, swirling, and growing into the appearance of an orb. Once their spell was complete, Merriva left her sisters and crossed the square toward the cobbler's shop with the unnatural orb pulsing and shining in the palm of her hand. Please, Taylana, the boy pleaded. Have mercy. Think of all we could rule if we but stood together. But Taylana and her elder sister began chanting a new spell, and pain, unlike any the wizard had yet felt, coursed through his veins. Though he willed himself to silence, Azael screamed in agony. From the corner of his eye, he saw Merriva enter the cobbler shop, and for the briefest of moments, thought he saw a shadowed figure waiting for her, just beyond the threshold of the door. Dark's new blade, the aptly christened Witch-Slayer, had already separated Taylana's head from her shoulders by the time the other two sisters realized he had recovered from Merriva's attack and rejoined the fray. The middle sister, whose name remains unknown even in the elven history, shrieked, and with a single arcane word became an intangible mist a mere moment before the Witch-Slayer could pierce her heart. She moved like a mighty gust of wind to Merriva's side. How'd you manage that? The boy asked, pointing to Taylana's pale head. Silver blade plus distracted witches equals weakened protection, Dark said. I don't think we'll get that lucky again. Leave that to me, Azael said, starting to backpedal while making every effort to keep his insides on the inside. I'll be back, most likely. Keep them occupied, yes? What do you... The boy was gone. The same spell that had carried him and the captain many kilometers from the witch's grasp had spirited him away again. Dark stood alone, facing two angry witches and a pirate captain who outweighed him by 7 stone and was under their complete control. Dark could only pray that his own reinforcements would be enough to turn the tide. should they somehow manage to arrive before his death. And there you have it. That's chapters 4 and 5 of The Witches of Greyfolk. Be sure and download your free copy today. There's no advertisements, no clickbaity, whatever, nothing there. Just a EPUB download for you to check out on your own. That's my gift to you. Give you something to read during this self-quarantine period. Anyway, that's it for chapter 5. We'll be back, I should say, next time with chapter 6, which is called A Summoning. And I believe that's a shorter one as well, so we'll probably be 6 and 7. So we will do that as soon as possible. Until next time, folks. Thanks for being here.